Hi everyone, Matt here and welcome back to Simply Strength. Firstly, thanks to everyone that's subscribed to my channel over the last few days. I'm thrilled that people are really enjoying the content and engaging with it in the comments section as well. And thanks to everybody that's shared my videos, given me shout outs and helped me spread the channel. I really do appreciate that. My topic today relates to the art of parenting, and I'd like to emphasise that it is an art. This choice of topic was inspired a while ago by a conversation I had in the comments with Truth Over Everything. It was also an area of discussion on LBC radio as I was driving home last night. They were talking about estranged children making contact with their parents, swallowing their pride, being the first to make a move and reconcile. And I'll tell you why I disagreed with them later on. But I do see this as a crucial issue for our species, and although I can't change a huge deal with the video, I'd like to highlight some key areas and provide a bit of insight with my own background and experiences. This is obviously going to involve me talking about some personal instances and things that happened over the years, which is kind of difficult to talk about, but I feel comfortable enough sharing it with my audience. So, many people are completely unqualified to have children, and they lack the knowledge, patience and skill to raise them correctly. They're completely uneducated as to the optimum environment for a child. And if the kids turn out even remotely, quote, normal, it's in spite of their parenting, not because of it. And this relates to my own case, my own life, but it's the crux of my own experience, with a particular emphasis on my father. And as I said, the stories I'm going to share with you are quite personal, difficult to talk about at times, but I see it as a way of getting it off my chest and hopefully helping others. There are people out there, of course, that have had or are having far worse experiences than I ever did. I'm just glad it's all behind me and I'm truly going my own way. Kids aren't stupid. They really aren't. They know when something's up, and I always remember being aware that 85% of the time my father was not normal. And this was based on conversations I had with school friends, my observations of how their families operated when I was visiting with them, my extended family interactions, and also my own research from reading, television, and so on. And from what I know now, it's reasonable to assume that he was either bipolar or had a narcissistic personality disorder or some condition like that, but he never did get it looked at, never acted on it, or honestly, I think he was and still is oblivious that he ever did anything wrong. I would say, and my sister would probably disagree, which I'll come on to in a moment, but for the most part, our father was an ogre. And if it wasn't for my mother as a calming influence, I don't know what would have happened. From as early on as I can remember, there was always a threat, or a fear if you will, of what would happen if we did something that he felt was wrong. There was always a threat of physical harm. You know, in the early years, especially if we were bothering my mum with anything we wanted, as kids do, there was sometimes the warning that I'll tell your dad when he gets in from work, but this was only a couple of occasions, and for the most part my mum did a sterling job with us. He had his own business, which involved predominantly manual repetitive labour, and he often did long arduous hours. And whilst I am thankful that we were all provided for and food was always on the table, as it should be in my opinion if you decide to have kids, I look back with regret that nothing was done sooner. There was always the threat of physical harm, and sometimes this was carried out. It's not fair to say that we were ever beaten, because that's inaccurate, and there are kids out there that do get beaten severely, and that's deplorable. I was always quite critical looking back of his regime, because it was a regime. In his house, under his roof, he used to say, everything had to be his way, otherwise we could go out the door. That was the euphemism. And this is bearing in mind that we were really quite young at the time. I began suspecting as I grew up, and being the oldest child, I've always been quite inquisitive and critical, always wanting to know how things work, that something was drastically wrong. But not with me as I first thought. I thought I had a problem, but the problem lay with him. Deep down I've always known that I'm innately a good person, and I've been vindicated now that I'm a mature adult. However, as a child, I think that my extremely low self-confidence, self-esteem and suitability for bullying in my primary school years were rooted in the complete failure of my father as a parent. My mother has always been there, and I do look up to her immensely. She was one of the first people I confided in about his behaviour, and that was when I realised it wasn't me all of the time. If it wasn't for her support, guidance and strength, I don't know what would have happened. We were fortunate that he worked such long hours that he barely saw us. If he had been home, we would have been doing all manner of chores and household jobs. Whilst I respected his ability to work hard at his business and get things done, this is one of the main traits I've tried to emulate, but there are scant few of those. The way he went about it was completely archaic. It's completely honest for me to say that I never loved him as a father. We were so opposite. And eventually, as I progressed through my teenage years, I grew to hate and resent him. And we as children were always seen to my mind as possessions of his, as extensions of him, and everything we did reflected on him as a person. And he was paranoid about this, and I'll provide examples of that later on. As far as I could tell, his personality was the result of his own parents messing him up. It's like a disease that gets passed. It's a hereditary disease from parent to child, and then obviously parent to child again. For instance, his father had run away from home himself at the age of 14 and gone in the army, which has its own problems. And his mother as well, when he was a child, had been in she'd had psychological problems and had to go into care for those to be treated. He'd had physical punishments for different things. I'm not sure whether he was, seriously abused physically, but he never really did say anything about that. But I've only heard the stories from his point of view, and I don't know, he did have 3 brothers. I don't know if he had a problem, and as part of that issue, his behaviour, the consequences were brought on. But I've never heard the other view because I never really saw my grandparents. But when he was alive, his father was he had a lot of bad things to say about him. Pretty much didn't have anything good to say. But then when he passed away, he was the greatest man to have ever lived. And I found this puzzling, really. I really did find it puzzling. And I'm sure it'll be the same when his own mother passes away too. For example, he'd been estranged from his own parents for about 15 years prior to 2012. And it's funny that now he's lost all but one of his family members, that being my sister. He goes back to her and his brother and all the rest that spurned him years ago. But that's another story. And all of this serves to illustrate my point. The disease gets passed on from parent to child, and this is a problem. It contributes, if only slightly, to my own lack of desire to have children. I wouldn't be able to give them the care and attention they so desperately need, and would also be unwilling to put in the hours to study and improve my knowledge in parenting techniques, and this is absolutely crucial, but I'm honest enough to admit it to myself. Given this complete absence of a positive male role model in the household, I found out how to be a real man mainly through my own research, the heroes I've detailed in other videos, characters in books and much more. These are my surrogate fathers, and now with YouTube and the internet, it's entirely possible to have mentors, father figures and so on through this medium. I remember Stefan Molyneux saying something in one of his videos to this effect: just because you are blood related to someone doesn't mean you are obliged to have a relationship with them. And I completely agreed with this statement and stand by it to this day. I've tried so hard in my adult life to surround myself with positive people that make me feel good about myself and about the richness of life and human interaction, as opposed to the negative atmosphere that punctuated our household as children. My mother, brother and I could honestly write a book on those first 18 to 20 years of my life and the moments that occurred. In fact, my mother got upset one time because of the family photos that were dotted around the house. She could always associate an argument or a blowout that occurred with the photo, which is sad. She has admitted that she should have divorced him sooner, but she's now learned from her mistakes. I don't blame her. She did everything within her means to protect us from it for the most part. I'm going to go through in a more free-form fashion some of the instances that stick in my mind that happened over the years in no particular order and relate them back to parenting. There was an occasion when I was about 19 years old, when I just got my first job in the manufacturing business. It was a very blue-collar job, and I was responsible for sort of stock control, and I had to grow up very quickly. And it was a very good starting point in life to learn how to be a grown-up. And I got home and my mum would always be cooking dinner. and I would sort of sit at the table, reading something while waiting for it and trying to sort of just catch up on the day. And he came in, and he was always making jokes about how he could do anything in the household, ironing, cooking, cleaning, everything else. But my mum always did the dinner, and she used to actually work for him at this business. It was like a family business. So she would work there during the day, come home, do all of the household stuff while he'd just come in and, have his meal. And it was very, very hard work. And I truly appreciate everything that my mum did. But he would always sort of make jokes about it, and mum would never really do anything. And he would never like it when the joke was reversed onto him. And for whatever reason, on this day, I normally wouldn't say anything, because at that time my confidence was very low. Normally I wouldn't say anything, and today I just thought it'd be funny to flip the joke. So he was basically saying, I can do anything around here, cooking. I don't know how it started, but the conversation that started it. But he basically said, I can do anything around the house, ironing, cooking, cleaning. And I thought I'd just say, well, you wouldn't think so, though, would you? And he basically, whilst we found it funny, he basically threatened to ask me outside and fight him. And I was just sat there sort of stunned, because I'd never had him say anything like that to me before. And I just thought, what the hell? And my mum was like, well, that's your son. I mean, what are you on about? It's a joke. And it was very revealing to me at the time. I just thought, and it was literally, you could see the rage in his face. And my brother later said to me, you should have just taken him outside and just ended it there and then. And we could have gone our separate ways then. But it was very, very, very revealing to me. I mean, that just showed me that being his son, that's what he thought of me. And yeah, I just thought, what a colossal failure you are. You can't take a joke, but everyone else, you can just dish it out, but you can't take it. And that's my abiding memory of that occasion, and it's always stuck with me. And growing up, I never really wanted to go away on holiday. I mean, we did do family holidays, but I've been blessed in that we've never really gone away abroad. I've been quite sheltered in my life today. And I know that the world is such a vast place, and people on YouTube tuning into this channel from all over the world, many places that I'd like to go to. I've got it all on a big bucket list, and now I'm a completely different person. I'm going to be checking out a lot of these places, and going my own way is really going to enable me to achieve as much as possible in my life. But I never really wanted to go on holiday with them as I got into my mid to late teens, because there was just more and more friction between us. It wasn't the fact that I didn't get on with my mother or siblings for the most part. It was the fact that I didn't want to spend any time in close proximity with him, because we'd have to do everything together. You couldn't just go off on your own and explore places, no matter where they might be. If we went away to the coast, it was like we had to do... I remember one occasion, actually, where I'd just got into health and fitness, and it was the summer, and we were staying in a hotel by the sea, and I wanted to go for a morning jog at 7 a.m, and because I wanted to do something that was just totally off the beaten path with what every other member of my family was doing, i.e. being asleep waiting for breakfast, he was arguing until he was blue in the face that he didn't want me to go. And in the end, I ended up going anyway. But I just couldn't see the issue. It was supposed to be my holiday as well, and I wanted to go and get some fresh air. And this was the age of about 16. I just couldn't understand, the issue. The next sort of theme I'd like to talk about was, we used to have arguments all the time as I got older, when I was in my late teens and early 20s, about whether or not to hit children. And I actually think that any sort of physical threat to kids is wrong, because it teaches them that to get your own way is, if you use violence to get your own way, then that's the message. It teaches children that, if I just hit this guy or hit this kid, they'll do as I say, as opposed to giving them the reason. And he just would argue and argue and argue that you should. And later on, my sister agrees with him that hitting children is right. And I've made a pact with myself that when she does have kids, if I witness her hitting her kids, then I will report it, because it's totally wrong. We really did, when we were growing up, we really did dread him coming through the door. It was almost like an ogre coming through the door, because you could never tell what mood he was in. Some days he would come in with a mood that was so overt, so happy-dappy, it was just unbelievable. And then other days he'd come in and just would not look at anyone, not talk to anyone, and just sit down, and just you wouldn't get a murmur out of him. And it would be this oppressive atmosphere. You could sense it. And you just had to guess which one would come through the door each day. And we had that for our entire childhood. And as I said, he would justify his point of view not by critical argument, but by force and fear. Because he said so. That was his argument. Because I say so. And to me, that's the ultimate failure of a parent. If you can't provide an answer or a reason to a kid who will understand. When they get beyond a certain point, they will understand what you're trying to say, the reason for it. Instead of just saying, because I said so, or because I'll give you a clip round the ear, or because I'll do this. It's insane. Also, something that always sticks with me, and I'll never forget, was that for whatever reason, he said that I would never be any good at anything. Whether that be a sport or a pursuit or anything, it was just said, that's why I'll never be any good at anything. As if he was the master of the universe. Something that I always, whether he did it through reverse psychology, I don't know, but it didn't seem that way at the time. And it's a message I always try and use to spur myself on in life, because anything I do, I'm always trying to do my best and give a good account of myself, but mainly just to prove him wrong. He was emotionally manipulative, cause arguments between, I reckon he used to choose a member of the family, whether that was one of my siblings or whatever, to get on his side and talk about the other one while they were out. That much I'm aware of. Which is just unbelievable if you're supposed to treat all of your children the same. He was hypocritical as well, do as I say, not as I do, which always used to do my head in. He was argumentative, he loved drama, he loved to create a stir. For example, I remember he never used to like giving lifts to people, and I can count on one hand how the amount of times that he would give us lifts everywhere. And once we started driving, that was less of the case. But I remember I was at university, and my brother, who was probably about 18 at the time, used to work in town, and it was about a 20-minute drive from where we lived. And agreed with him a place to meet up. But unfortunately, my brother's phone had died. He got there, and eventually he found him. And because he hadn't been where he said he would be, he started swearing at him when he got in the car. My brother said, well, I'll walk then. And he said, okay, walk. So of course, after he said, well, walk then, my brother got out of the car and opted to walk the 2.5-hour trek home on his own with a phone that was flat. And bearing in mind, this walk involved not just city walking, but also walking through country lanes in the dark. But nevertheless, he did it. And, maybe some people do that all the time, but he got home and was absolutely raging. And my dad was just sheepish in one of the rooms, and they had a massive, massive argument. And my mum didn't really understand, because he always used to get, my dad always used to get pissed off that she would not side up with him on every issue, even if he was wrong. But anyway, that was one occasion. There was another thing, back to what I was speaking about if you were his child, it was almost like he owned you. You were his property, and you reflected on him. And I remember my sister wanted to get tattoos. And whatever your views on tattoos are, I personally wouldn't get them. I do think they look okay on some people, but I won't get into that debate. But anyway, she wanted them, and he basically said that she bearing in mind she was like 18, she lives under his roof, so that's why she shouldn't have them. And he basically blew up when she had them anyway. And he was calling her a piece of trash and basically a slut and this and that. And they had a huge argument. And she looks past it now. She's the only person who still talks to him, even after all of that. And I distinctly remember another one where we were never allowed sleepovers growing up. never allowed sleepovers. And I can't remember ever having one. And my sister wanted one. And they had a huge argument, and she eventually called him a prick because he just wasn't getting it. And he essentially physically assaulted her, basically strangled her around the throat. Well, not strangled her, but just grabbed her around the throat. And I was just like, what the hell? And she's the only one, again, present day, is the only one who is not estranged from him. And I find it amusing. I really do. I find it absolutely amusing. And that would happen quite often. Whenever I was always very critical as a child, I was always trying to not cause arguments, but ask why we were doing stuff. And when he wouldn't have an answer, he would always resort to a physical threat. So he'd sort of get his index finger and, as if he was pointing, but sort of shove it into your rib cage or shove it into your chest, and it would hurt when you were a little kid. And as I said, with the physical punishment thing, it's like, and Stefan Molyneux said on numerous occasions, it's like you at work making a mistake, and a 20-foot giant coming over and smacking you in the chest, basically. It's just that, and people say, "Oh, it's not the same. It's not the same." Well, it is. It's exactly the same. It's an admission of failure as a parent. And another one I've literally just remembered this off the top of my head is I remember my brother playing football or soccer, to those of you across the Atlantic. He was about 8 years old, and it was his first ever game of football for a club. And he went down to watch, and literally would not stop screaming and shouting, basically exploding on the touchline, and being an embarrassment. And he never went to another game. And my brother carried on playing for another 10 or 12 years until he was quite late teen, really. But he never went to another game. I thought that was quite bad at the time, because I would have been just about 12, 13. But what an embarrassment. Yeah, it's just first ever game of football, and it's not really being supportive. It's being negative and dragging the child down when you should be giving, boys, they need reinforcement and encouragement. And we never got any, as far as I can remember. All of my confidence, all of my drive and application comes from me. I had to teach it myself because I didn't get it from a positive male parent. With all of that said, I don't consider myself hard done by at all. It's not too hard done by it, in the very least. But nevertheless, it was still emotional and physical abuse, as much as some of the members of my family play it down. Always, he said that he didn't care what any of our friends or their parents did, and yet he's the first to look around in a public place to see if people are looking at him. He's the first to worry what people think of him, and the hypocrisy was unbelievable. Anyway, when we were all grown up, I was about 24. My brother probably was the youngest one of us. He was about 20. My parents ended up splitting up, and he basically changed from an ogre, a threat, a nasty guy, most of the time anyway, into an absolute wimp. He would be crying all the time, which I'd never seen him cry, really. And complete weakling, absolute weakling. And it made me think, all those years, you were a bully, you were making out as if you were an ogre, making out as if you were a complete douchebag, and all that while you were an absolute wimp. And it turns out that as an adult, since that time, he's actually got into physical altercations with people that I've heard secondhand from my sister. And he's can't hold his own. So what that tells me is he's big enough to push around a kid who can't defend himself against his physical strength and size, but is not happy to confront other adults and be the same way with them. So that's a bully for all intents and purposes. So since that time, since the split, I did try and make an effort because I felt that I would be the bigger man. And when I went off to university, that was when it coincided with the breakup. I did ring him 2 or 3 times, but it was always me doing the ringing, and I got sick and tired of it. And I think, actually, you're better off not in my life For example, I had my graduation from university, and he was like bitter about not being invited, but I never had any encouragement about leaving my job and pursuing my education. There was never any encouragement at all. And I imagine it's just to cause drama, just to cause a scene. So I'm much happier being estranged, to be honest. I'm happy with things the way they are. I've moved on. I don't regard him as family anymore, because he's basically, transformed from bully to wimp. Now we're all mature enough to fight back. He always said that he wanted to move down south or move abroad or anything like that, but he was a talker, whereas I pride myself on being someone that carries out my ambitions. I don't want to end up like him. He's basically gone back to the family that he fell out with, his mum, who's probably in her 80s now, and his brother, who fell out with him as well. And I just think I can't be doing with the aggravation. With all of that being said, and if you've listened this far, I appreciate that. I know it can be, I shan't say boring, but you need to be able to relate to this. But some of the wider implications, kids that are brought up by television sets, kids that are physically abused or sexually abused, kids that are brought up in poverty, which I was fortunate enough not to be brought up in poverty, but I know that a lot of you are, a lot of them out there are. So many other wider problems. This is really important. I mean, if you're going to have a kid, you need to do your research. You need to learn about effective, positive parenting. It's an absolute skill. It's an art form, and this is something that not just anybody should be having children, because these are people of the future of the human race. And I, for example, will not be having children or getting married because, well, for many reasons, as I've talked about in other videos, but I know that I wouldn't be able to give the necessary time and attention, finances and education, everything else, to a child. I'd rather be, it's selfish of me to have a kid and not want one. So I would rather be, an uncle to some, my brother or sister's kids, someone that can impart knowledge, be, a mentor or an inspiration to them, but certainly not my own children, and I doubt that my outlook will change. I'd really like to thank you all for listening to this video and being patient as I basically rant and talk through my childhood experience. It wasn't all bad. In fact, it was probably more good than bad, because he wasn't around for a lot of it. I mean, I did have some positive discussions with him about history and things. We did have some common ground, but in general, we did not. He couldn't relate to me on, video games. I know a lot of people's parents are video game fans. We disagreed a lot on music, popular culture, or things that we're into, because, and basically, as soon as I got into my music and started growing my hair and things like that, it was at that stage of my teens, he would just berate me and never give a step of encouragement, and never give an iota of praise. And these are just the things that stick with me, 10 years on. So it's crazy. But I've done everything possible, in spite of my parenting, to become a strong and successful person, be a good person, and basically, give everyone a chance that I meet in my life, and also continue to strive and develop myself. I still haven't made my mind up if I do it all again the same way, but that's a philosophical argument for another day. But I do hope this helps people out there, and I'd be keen to hear your own experiences, if you'd be willing to share them. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Again, thank you to everyone who's subscribed to date. And if you'd like to help me improve and expand the content on this channel, do check out my Patreon page. Thanks again, and until next time, do take care.